The desert air shimmered with heat waves as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tactical gear for the third time in 10 minutes. The weight of his rifle felt heavier today, though he couldn't explain why. Something about this mission felt different from the dozens of others he'd completed with his Navy SEAL team. Maybe it was the intel they'd received about potential civilian casualties, or perhaps it was the strange silence that had settled over their target area for the past week. His team moved through the abandoned village like shadows, each man knowing his role without need for communication. They had been tracking a high-value target for months, and intelligence suggested he was hiding in this remote settlement near the Afghan-Pakistan border. The village appeared deserted, with only the wind stirring up small dust devils between the crumbling mud brick houses. Rodriguez paused at a corner, pressing his back against the sun-baked wall. Through his earpiece, he heard the steady breathing of his teammates as they maintained their positions. Team leader Lieutenant Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system, barely above a whisper. "Bravo team, report status." Clear on the north side, came the response from Petty Officer First Class David Chun. "South perimeter secured," added Chief Petty Officer Mike Thompson. Rodriguez was about to report his own position when a sound made him freeze. It wasn't the crack of gunfire or the whistle of incoming mortars that every soldier learned to fear. It was something far more unsettling, the soft whimper of someone in pain. The sound came again, weaker this time, from inside the building he was approaching. Rodriguez signaled to his nearest teammate, Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Williams, who was positioned 20 meters away. Williams acknowledged with a slight nod and began moving to provide cover. As Rodriguez approached the doorway, the smell hit him first. It wasn't the metallic scent of blood that he'd become accustomed to over his 8 years of service. This was different, antiseptic mixed with something else he couldn't identify. Medical supplies, perhaps. He peered around the doorframe, weapon ready. The interior was darker than expected, with only thin streams of sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls. It took several seconds for his eyes to adjust, and when they did, what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A figure sat slumped against the far wall, partially hidden in shadow. At first glance, it appeared to be a young woman, her dark hair matted with sweat and dust. She wore civilian clothes, a simple tunic, and pants that had seen better days. But what struck Rodriguez most was her stillness. She wasn't cowering or trying to hide. Instead, she sat with an odd dignity, as if she was waiting for something. "Contact," Rodriguez whispered into his comm. "Possible civilian, female, appears wounded." "Copy that," Morrison responded. "Approach with caution. Could be a trap." Rodriguez knew the protocol. In their line of work, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Insurgents had used civilians as human shields before, and booby traps were a constant threat. But something about this situation felt different. He stepped into the room, keeping his weapon trained on the shadows while scanning for threats. The woman didn't move, didn't even seem to notice his presence. As he got closer, he could see that she was indeed injured. Dark stains on her clothing suggested blood loss, and her breathing was shallow but steady. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out softly in Arabic, then repeated it in Pashto. "Are you hurt? Can you understand me?" No response. The woman's eyes remained closed, though he could tell she was conscious from the slight movement of her chest. Rodriguez activated his throat mic again. "Morrison, I need Doc Patterson over here. We've got a wounded civilian who needs medical attention." "Negative," came his sharp reply. "Mission parameters don't include civilian medical aid. We're here for the HVE only." Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten. He'd always followed orders without question, but something about leaving this woman to die didn't sit right with him. "Sir, she's badly injured. If we don't help her, she won't make it." "That's not our problem, Rodriguez. Stay focused on the mission." The woman's eyes fluttered open at that moment, and Rodriguez found himself staring into the most extraordinary pair of eyes he'd ever seen. They were dark brown, almost black, but what struck him wasn't their color, it was their intelligence. Despite her obvious pain and weakness, there was something sharp and aware in her gaze that made him take a step back. She studied his face for a long moment, taking in his tactical gear, his weapon, the American flag patch on his sleeve. Then, to his complete surprise, she spoke in perfect English with only the slightest trace of an accent. "Your Navy SEALs," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Rodriguez's finger tightened on his rifle grip. How could a civilian in this remote village know enough about American military units to identify them so specifically? Most locals couldn't tell the difference between regular army and special forces, let alone distinguish between different elite units. "Who are you?" he asked, switching to English since she demonstrated her fluency. The woman tried to shift her position against the wall and winced in pain. "My name is Aliyah," she said, "and I think you're looking for someone who was here 3 days ago." Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. 3 days ago would have been exactly when their target was supposed to have been in this area. "What do you know about that?" Aliyah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, Rodriguez saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't fear or confusion that he saw there. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of his own teammates after particularly difficult missions. It was the look of someone who had seen too much. "He's gone," she said simply. "But he left people behind. Bad people. They came back yesterday, looking for something he hid. When they couldn't find it, She gestured weakly at her injuries. "Ma'am, I need you to be more specific. Who came back? How many?" Aliyah's breath came in short gasps now. Whatever had happened to her, the injuries were serious. 6 men, maybe 7. They said they would return tonight when it got dark. They're looking for weapons. A cache that was hidden somewhere in the village. Rodriguez's mind raced. This changed everything. If there were still hostiles in the area planning to return, his team was potentially walking into an ambush. He needed to relay this information to Morrison immediately, but something held him back. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. For the first time, Aliyah smiled, though it was weak and pained. "Because I've seen what men like that do to villages like this one. And I've seen what men like you do to stop them." The comment was strange, too specific. Rodriguez studied her face more carefully. Despite the dirt and blood, despite the obvious trauma she'd endured, there was something about her bearing that didn't fit with his assumptions about a random civilian caught in the crossfire. "Aliyah," he said slowly, "what do you do? What's your job?" She was quiet for so long that he thought she might have lost consciousness. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I help people. When they're hurt. When they need someone to put them back together. Medical training." That would explain the antiseptic smell he'd noticed when he entered the room. It might also explain her calm demeanor, despite her injuries. Healthcare workers, especially those who'd worked in conflict zones, often developed a particular type of composure under pressure. "Are you a doctor?" Rodriguez asked. Aliyah shook her head slightly. "Not exactly." Before Rodriguez could ask what she meant by that, William's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Rodriguez, we've got movement on the east side. Multiple contacts approaching the village perimeter." Rodriguez's blood went cold. If the hostiles Aliyah had warned him about were returning early, his team could be caught in a vulnerable position. They'd spread out to search the village systematically, but that formation was designed for clearing operations, not defending against an assault. "How many?" Morrison's voice cut through the comm channel. "Hard to tell from this distance," Williams replied. "At least 5, maybe more. They're moving cautiously, like they know the area." Rodriguez looked down at Aliyah, who was watching him with those unervingly intelligent eyes. She'd been right about the returning hostiles. But how could she have known the timing so precisely? "Morrison," Rodriguez spoke into his comm. "The civilian has intel about hostile movement. She says they're looking for a weapons cache hidden in the village." "Copy that. All teams prepare for contact." "Rodriguez, extract yourself from that building and get to the rally point." Rodriguez stood up conflicted. Every instinct told him to follow orders and rejoin his team. But, looking down at Aliyah, he knew that leaving her here would be a death sentence. If the hostiles found her alive, they'd likely torture her for information before killing her. And If they didn't find her, her injuries would do the job for them. I can't move on my own, Aliyah said, as if reading his thoughts. The bleeding, it's internal. If I try to get up, I'll pass out. Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, though not for the reasons he expected. He reached down and carefully lifted Aliyah into his arms. She was lighter than he'd expected, and he could feel her trembling, whether from pain, shock, or blood loss, he couldn't tell. "What are you doing?" she asked weakly. "Something stupid, probably," Rodriguez replied. "But I'm not leaving you here to die." As he carried her toward the door, Aliyah spoke again, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand. I'm not what you think I am." Rodriguez paused. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire erupted from somewhere outside the building. The battle for the village had begun, and Rodriguez found himself caught between his duty to his team and his determination to save the mysterious woman in his arms. He pressed himself against the wall next to the doorway, still holding Aliyah, and peered out into the street. Muzzle flashes lit up the evening twilight as his teammates engaged the returning hostiles. The sound of gunfire echoed off the mud brick walls, creating a disorienting cacophony that made it difficult to determine exactly where the shots were coming from. "All units, report status." Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Chun here, taking fire from the north. Multiple shooters. Thompson, southwest corner. They've got us flanked. Williams, east side. I count at least 8 hostiles, possibly more." Rodriguez felt Aliyah tense in his arms. 8 hostiles was more than she'd predicted. Either her information had been incomplete, or the situation had changed since yesterday. "There's something else," she whispered urgently. "The weapons cache they're looking for, it's not just small arms. They're explosives, enough to level half the village." Rodriguez's stomach dropped. If the hostiles got their hands on a significant amount of explosives, they could cause massive casualties among his team. He had to get this information to Morrison, but he also couldn't leave Aliyah exposed in the middle of a firefight. A new sound joined the gunfire, the distinctive whine of an RPG being launched. Rodriguez instinctively ducked, pulling Aliyah closer to his chest as the rocket-propelled grenade exploded somewhere nearby. Chunks of mud brick and debris rained down around them. "RPGs," Williams shouted over the comm. "They've got heavy weapons." Rodriguez knew they were in serious trouble. His team had expected to be conducting a search and possible arrest operation, not fighting a pitched battle against well-armed insurgents. They had enough ammunition for a standard mission, but not for an extended firefight. "Rodriguez, where the hell are you?" Morrison's voice was tight with stress. "Building 3, south side. I've got the civilian, and she's got critical intel about explosives. Negative on the civilian. Get to the rally point now." "That's an order." Rodriguez looked down at Aliyah, who was watching him with those penetrating dark eyes. Despite her obvious pain and weakness, there was something in her expression that made him think she understood exactly what kind of decision he was facing. "You should go," she said quietly. "Your team needs you." "They need this intel more," Rodriguez replied. "Where are the explosives hidden?" Aliyah was quiet for a moment, and Rodriguez could see her struggling with some internal debate. Finally, she spoke. "The old well in the center of the village. There's a false bottom about 6 feet down. But you have to understand, those men out there aren't just random insurgents. They're professionals, military trained." The pieces started falling into place for Rodriguez. The precision of the attack, the coordination of the hostile forces, the fact that they knew exactly where to look for hidden weapons. This wasn't a random terror cell. These were soldiers, possibly former military, who had turned to insurgent activities. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Rodriguez could hear boots running past outside, and shouted commands in Arabic. The hostiles were maneuvering to surround his team's positions. "We need to move," Rodriguez said. "Can you handle being carried while I'm moving tactically?" Aliyah nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "I've been in situations like this before." That was another strange comment. Most civilians, even medical personnel, wouldn't describe being in the middle of a firefight as something they'd experienced before. But Rodriguez didn't have time to puzzle over her background. He could hear the tactical situation deteriorating over his comm system. "Man down!" Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Thompson's hit." Rodriguez felt his chest tighten. Thompson was one of the most experienced members of their team, a veteran of dozens of missions. If he was down, the situation was worse than Rodriguez had thought. "How bad?" Morrison asked. "Leg wound, but he's losing blood. I need Doc Patterson over here." Doc Patterson was their team medic, and Rodriguez knew that if he was treating Thompson, the team's medical capabilities would be stretched thin, which made his decision about Aliyah even more complicated. "I need to help my teammate," Rodriguez told her. "But if I put you down here, those men will find you." Aliyah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, Rodriguez saw a resolve there that surprised him. "Then, don't put me down. Take me with you." "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. We're about to move through an active combat zone. The chances of both of us making it out alive are better than the chances of me surviving here alone," Aliyah interrupted. "And you'll need someone who knows this village. There are tunnels under some of the buildings. Ways to move without being seen." Rodriguez stared at her. Tunnels? That wasn't in any of their intelligence reports. How could a civilian know about hidden passages that military intelligence had missed? "Show me," he said. Aliyah pointed weakly toward the back of the room. "There's a loose stone in the floor near the back wall. It leads to a passage that connects to the building where your teammate is injured." Rodriguez looked where she was pointing, and sure enough, he could see that one of the stone floor pieces didn't quite match the others. It would have been invisible to someone who wasn't specifically looking for it. He carried Aliyah to the back of the room, and, still holding her with one arm, used his free hand to pry up the loose stone. Beneath it was a narrow opening, just large enough for a person to crawl through. The smell of earth and old air wafted up from the darkness. "This connects to other buildings?" Rodriguez asked. "The whole village," Aliyah replied. "It's an old smuggling network from before the war. Most people forgot about it, but I've used it before." Rodriguez was beginning to realize that Aliyah was far more than just a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her knowledge of the village's hidden infrastructure, her calm under fire, her ability to provide tactical intelligence. None of it fit with his initial assessment. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you just a civilian?" Aliyah met his gaze steadily. Define civilian. Before Rodriguez could respond, an explosion much closer than the others shook the entire building. Dust and small pieces of debris fell from the ceiling, and Rodriguez could hear the sound of walls collapsing somewhere nearby. "Rodriguez!" Morrison's voice was sharp with urgency. "The hostiles are using the explosives. They're bringing down buildings to flush us out." Rodriguez realized that waiting any longer would get them both killed. Whatever Aliyah's true identity was, he'd have to figure out later. Right now, he needed to use her knowledge to save his team. "Can you guide us through these tunnels?" he asked. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. Rodriguez lowered both of them into the narrow passage. The space was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Moving while carrying Aliyah would be difficult, but it was better than trying to cross the village above ground while under fire. As they began moving through the tunnel, Aliyah spoke quietly. "Your teammate, the one who was shot. The bullet probably hit the femoral artery. If your medic doesn't get the bleeding stopped in the next few minutes, he'll go into shock." Rodriguez paused. That was an extremely specific medical assessment from someone who couldn't even see Thompson. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've seen that type of wound before. Many times." The certainty in her voice made Rodriguez's skin crawl. Who was this woman? And how had she acquired medical knowledge that seemed to rival that of a combat medic? As they continued crawling through the tunnel, Rodriguez could hear the sounds of battle continuing above them. Gunfire, explosions, shouted orders in both English and Arabic. His team was fighting for their lives while he was underground with a mystery woman who seemed to know far more about warfare than any civilian should. "Turn left at the next junction," Aaliyah instructed. That will take us under the building where your teammate is. Rodriguez followed her directions, moving as quickly as he could, while trying not to jar her injuries. The tunnel was older than he'd expected, with fitted stones that spoke of careful construction. This wasn't a hastily dug hiding spot. It was part of a sophisticated network that had probably taken years to build. Up ahead, Aaliyah whispered, "There should be another loose stone in the ceiling." Rodriguez looked up and saw what she meant. Above them, one of the ceiling stones was slightly different from the others. He pushed against it and felt it give way, revealing another opening that led upward. "Rodriguez, where are you?" Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Thompson's losing consciousness. Doc's doing what he can, but we need to get him out of here." "I'm coming up from below," Rodriguez replied. "Don't shoot me." He emerged from the tunnel into another room, this one clearly having been used as some kind of workshop. Tools and equipment were scattered across workbenches, and the smell of metal and oil hung in the air. Through a doorway, he could see Chan crouched over Thompson while Doc Patterson worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Rodriguez carried Aaliyah into the main room, and Doc Patterson looked up, startled. "Who the hell is that?" "Civilian with medical training," Rodriguez said quickly. "She says Thompson hit the femoral artery." Doc Patterson's eyes widened. How could she possibly? He looked down at his patient, then back at Aaliyah. "She's right. The angle of entry, the amount of blood loss. It has to be the femoral. But I can't get in there to clamp it off with the equipment I have." Aaliyah spoke up, her voice weak but clear. "You need to apply pressure 3 inches above the wound site, not directly on it. Use your tactical tourniquet, but position it higher than you normally would." Doc Patterson stared at her for a moment, then followed her instructions. Almost immediately, the bleeding began to slow. "Jesus Patterson muterid." How did you know that? Rodriguez was wondering the same thing. The medical knowledge Aaliyah was displaying went far beyond basic first aid. She was giving advice that was more sophisticated than what many emergency room doctors would know. "Because I've treated combat wounds before," Aaliyah said simply. Rodriguez felt his world shift. Combat wound. Not accident victims or civilian injuries, combat wounds. That phrase had very specific implications, and none of them involved innocent civilians. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully, "I think it's time you told us exactly who you are." Aaliyah looked around the room, taking in the faces of the Navy SEALs who were all now staring at her. Despite her obvious injuries and weakness, Rodriguez could see her making some kind of calculation. "My name is Aaliyah Nazir," she said finally, "and I'm a medic with the Afghan National Army Special Operations Forces." The room went dead silent. Even the sounds of gunfire from outside seemed to fade as Rodriguez processed what she had just said. Afghan National Army Special Forces, that made her a coalition ally, but it also raised a dozen new questions about what she was doing here, why she was alone, and why she hadn't identified herself immediately. "Prove it," Chin said bluntly. Aaliyah reached slowly into her tunic and pulled out a small metal object. Rodriguez recognized it immediately. A military identification tag, similar to American dog tags, but with different markings. Chun took it and examined it closely. "It looks legitimate," Chun said. "But that doesn't explain why you're here alone, dressed as a civilian, in a village we were told was deserted." "Because," Aaliyah said, "I was tracking the same HVT you were. And I've been here for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on his network." Rodriguez felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. An Afghan Special Forces medic operating alone in hostile territory, tracking their same target. The implications were staggering. Why wasn't our command told about this operation? Rodriguez asked. "Because," a new voice said from the doorway, "your command wasn't supposed to be here." Everyone in the room turned to see Lieutenant Morrison standing in the entrance, his weapon raised, and pointed directly at Aaliyah. "Sir," Rodriguez said, confused. Morrison's expression was grim. "Rodriguez, step away from her." "Now, what's going on?" "I've been in contact with command. They ran her ID through the system." Morrison's voice was deadly serious. Aliyah Nazir was killed in action 6 months ago during a raid in Helmand Province. Whoever this woman is, she's not who she claims to be. Rodriguez felt his blood turn to ice. The woman he'd been carrying, the woman who had saved Thompson's life, was using the identity of a dead soldier, which meant that everything she'd told them could be a lie. But as he looked down at Aliyah, he saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. It wasn't the look of someone who had been caught in a deception. Instead, there was a sadness there, deep and profound, as if Morrison's words had confirmed something she had been dreading. "You're right," Aliyah said quietly. "Aliyah Nazir is dead. I should know. I watched her die." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Rodriguez found himself caught between training that told him to follow Morrison's lead and treat her as a hostile, and instinct that told him there was more to this story. "Then who are you?" Morrison demanded. The woman who had called herself Aliyah closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, Rodriguez saw a weariness there that went far beyond her physical injuries. "My real name is Dr. Samira Hassan," she said. "I'm a trauma surgeon with Doctors Without Borders. And the reason I have Aliyah's identification tags is because I held her in my arms while she bled to death in my field hospital." Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, but the picture they formed was more complex than he'd expected. A humanitarian doctor carrying the tags of a fallen soldier, operating alone in hostile territory, with knowledge of both medicine and military tactics. 6 months ago, Samira continued, Aliyah Nazir was brought to my facility after a unit was ambushed. She was critically wounded, but she lived long enough to tell me about a terrorist network that was planning a major attack. She made me promise that if she didn't survive, I would find a way to stop them. "So you took her identity," Morrison said. "I took her mission," Samira corrected. "The HVT you're tracking isn't just a random terrorist leader. He's coordinating attacks on medical facilities throughout the region. Hospitals, clinics, vaccination sites, anywhere that doctors like me are trying to help people." Rodriguez felt his understanding of the situation shift once again. A doctor seeking justice for attacks on medical facilities would explain both her medical expertise and her knowledge of military operations. But it still didn't explain how she'd ended up here, alone and injured. "The men who attacked this village," Samira continued, "they weren't looking for weapons. They were looking for me. I've been tracking their network for months, gathering evidence of their attacks on medical facilities. They know I can identify them, and they want me dead." Another explosion outside reminded Rodriguez that whatever Samira's true story was, they were all still in immediate danger. The tactical situation hadn't changed. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by hostiles who knew the terrain better than they did. "We can sort out her identity later," Rodriguez said. "Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here alive." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but another burst of gunfire very close to their building convinced him that Rodriguez was right. "Thompson's stable enough to move," Doc Patterson reported, "but he's going to need real medical attention soon." "The tunnels," Rodriguez said. "Samira knows about a tunnel network under the village. We can use it to move without being exposed." "How do we know she's not leading us into a trap?" Chen asked. It was a fair question, and Rodriguez didn't have a good answer. Everything about their situation was wrong. Their intelligence had been incomplete, their target was gone, and they were now dealing with a woman whose identity was questionable at best. But as he looked at Samira, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the way she'd warned them about the returning hostiles, the way she'd helped save Thompson's life, the way she'd guided them through the tunnels to safety. If she was working with the enemy, she'd had multiple opportunities to get them all killed. Because, Rodriguez said finally, if she wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. Morrison studied Rodriguez's face for a long moment, then looked at Samira. "Doctor," he said, "if that's really what you are, then you understand the oath to do no harm. If you're lying to us, if you lead my men into danger, I will hold you personally responsible." Samira met his gaze steadily. "Lieutenant," I've dedicated my life to saving people. I'm not going to stop now. Rodriguez helped Samira to her feet, supporting her weight as they prepared to move. As they headed toward the tunnel entrance, she spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "There's something else you need to know," she said. "The explosives the hostiles are looking for, they're not just planning to use them here. This village is a staging area. They're planning something much bigger." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. "What kind of bigger?" "The kind that will kill hundreds of innocent people," Samira replied. "And if we don't stop them tonight, it's going to happen tomorrow." As they descended into the tunnel network, Rodriguez realized that saving Samira might have been the most important decision he'd ever made. Not just because she needed help, but because she might be the key to preventing a catastrophe that would dwarf anything they'd encountered before. The tunnel stretched ahead of them into darkness, and Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving towards something that would change all of their lives forever. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued, but ahead of them lay mysteries that went far deeper than a simple special operations mission. In his arms, Samira remained silent, but Rodriguez could feel the tension in her body. Whatever she knew about the terrorist network, whatever she'd learned during her months of investigation, it was something that had nearly gotten her killed. And as they moved through the ancient tunnels beneath the Afghan village, Rodriguez couldn't help but wonder if the woman he was carrying might be the most dangerous person any of them had ever met. Not because she was an enemy, but because she knew secrets that someone was willing to kill to protect. The tunnel system beneath the village was more extensive than Rodriguez had imagined. As they moved through the narrow passages, Samira directing their path with whispered instructions, he began to understand that they were navigating something that had been built over decades, possibly centuries. The stonework was sophisticated, with careful drainage channels and air circulation that kept the tunnels from becoming death traps. "Stop here," Samira whispered as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. "Listen." Rodriguez held his breath and strained his ears. Above them, he could hear footsteps and muffled voices speaking Arabic. The hostiles were searching the buildings systematically, probably looking for the entrance points to the tunnel network. "They know about this place," Chun whispered from behind them. "Not all of it," Samira replied quietly. "These tunnels connect to natural caves that extend for kilometers. Even if they find some entrances, they can't map the whole system." Rodriguez was impressed despite himself. Whether she was really Dr. Samira Hassan or someone else entirely, this woman had clearly spent considerable time learning the geography of this area. That level of preparation suggested a much more sophisticated operation than a single doctor seeking justice. "Which way to get us out of the village?" Morrison asked. Samira pointed to the leftmost tunnel. "That passage leads to a cave system about half a kilometer south of the village. But there's something you need to understand first. The explosives I mentioned, they're not in the old well." "I lied about that." Every weapon in the tunnel was suddenly pointed at Samira. Rodriguez felt his heart rate spike as he realized how vulnerable they'd all become by trusting her. "Easy," Samira said, holding up her hands. "I lied because I needed to get you away from that building before the hostiles surrounded it. The real cache is much more dangerous than you know." "Where?" Morrison demanded. "There's a mosque on the hill overlooking the village. It looks abandoned, but the basement has been converted into a weapons storage facility. Not just small arms and explosives, chemical weapons. Chlorine gas, possibly sarin." Rodriguez felt his blood run cold. Chemical weapons changed everything. If terrorists got their hands on that kind of material, the casualties could be massive. "How do you know this?" Morrison asked. "Because I've been documenting their entire network for months. The HVD you were tracking, Khalil al-Rashid, he's not just a regional terrorist leader. He's a former chemical weapons specialist who worked for Saddam Hussein's government. When Iraq fell, he disappeared with samples of some of the most deadly substances ever created." Rodriguez processed this information with growing alarm. Their mission had been described as a simple high-value target elimination. No one had mentioned anything about chemical weapons or former Iraqi WMD specialists. "Why wasn't this in our briefing?" Chin asked. "Because your government doesn't officially know about it yet. Samira replied. The intelligence I've gathered is too recent to have made it through your bureaucracy. By the time your agencies finish analyzing and vetting my reports, Al-Rashid will have already used those weapons. Morrison studied Samira's face in the dim light filtering down from above. And you know this how? Because I intercepted communications between his cell and buyers in Kabul. The attack is planned for tomorrow during Friday prayers at the Grand Mosque. Thousands of people will be in a confined space. The weight of this revelation hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Thousands of innocent civilians, including women and children, could die if they didn't stop this attack. But their team of 6 men, 1 wounded, was hardly equipped to take on a chemical weapons facility. We need to call on support, Rodriguez said. No time, Morrison replied grimly. Even if we could get through to command, it would take hours to coordinate a response. By then, Al-Rashid's people will have moved the weapons. Then, we have to stop them ourselves, Samira said. We? Morrison asked pointedly. Lady, I still don't know if you're telling us the truth about anything. For all I know, you're leading us into an ambush. Samira met his gaze steadily. Then, why would I tell you about the chemical weapons? If I were working with them, I want you to focus on the fake weapons cache while they move the real threat. It was a logical point, and Rodriguez could see Morrison processing it. The tactical situation was complex enough without having to second-guess their only source of intelligence about the area. Assuming you're telling the truth, Morrison said, what exactly do you think 6 Navy SEALs and 1 wounded doctor can do against a fortified position with chemical weapons? Because I know their security procedures, Samira replied. I've been watching them for weeks. They rotate guards every 4 hours, and the next rotation isn't until midnight. Right now, there are only 3 men guarding the facility. Rodriguez checked his watch. It was 2,100 hours. They had 3 hours before the guard rotation. If Samira was right, it might be their only window of opportunity. What about the hostiles in the village? Chen asked. They're a distraction, Samira said. Al-Rashid left them here to keep any coalition forces busy while he moved the chemical weapons to Kabul. They don't know about the mosque facility. It's compartmentalized information. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a terrorist cell. It was a sophisticated operation with multiple layers of security and deception. The fact that they'd stumbled into it was either incredibly lucky or incredibly unlucky, depending on how things played out. Thompson, Morrison said, turning to their wounded teammate. How are you holding up? I can move, Thompson replied through gritted teeth. Won't be running any marathons, but I can handle my weapon. Doc Patterson looked doubtful. He's lost a lot of blood. He needs real medical attention. I can help with that, Samira said. I have supplies cached in the cave system. Nothing fancy, but enough to stabilize him properly. Morrison made his decision. All right, we move to the cave system, get Thompson treated, and then assess our options for the mosque facility. But, Doctor, he said, emphasizing the title with skepticism, if this turns out to be a setup, you'll be the first casualty. They began moving through the leftmost tunnel, Rodriguez supporting Samira while Chun helped Thompson. The passage was longer than the others they'd used, and Rodriguez could feel the air getting cooler as they moved away from the village. After 20 minutes of careful movement, the tunnel opened into a natural cave system. The space was much larger than Rodriguez had expected, with multiple chambers branching off in the main cavern. Shafts of moonlight filtered down through openings in the rock ceiling, providing enough illumination to see without using tactical lights. There, Samira pointed to a pile of rocks that looked natural, but was clearly arranged to conceal something. Medical supplies are under there. Chun investigated and found a waterproof container filled with medical equipment. It was military-grade gear, not the basic first aid supplies Rodriguez had expected, but sophisticated trauma treatment materials. This is expensive stuff, Doc Patterson observed as he examined the supplies. And it's all recent manufacture. Where did you get this? I've had help, Samira said simply. There are people in the Afghan government who believe al-Rashid needs to be stopped, but who can act officially. Rodriguez was getting a clearer picture of what Samira represented. She wasn't just a rogue doctor seeking justice. She was part of an unofficial intelligence operation, possibly involving multiple governments. The scope of the situation was far beyond anything their team had been prepared for. As Doc Patterson worked on properly treating Thompson's wound with the new supplies, Morrison pulled Rodriguez aside. "What's your read on her?" Morrison asked quietly. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "She's told us the truth about everything we've been able to verify. The tunnels, the hostiles' movements, Thompson's wound. She's been accurate about it all. But she's definitely not just a civilian doctor. The way she moves, the way she assesses threats, the quality of her equipment, she's had military training. Extensive training." Morrison nodded. "I'm getting the same impression. The question is whether that makes her more trustworthy or less." Rodriguez looked over at Samira, who was quietly helping Doc Patterson organize the medical supplies. Despite her own injuries, she was moving with efficiency and purpose. Whatever her true background, she was clearly someone accustomed to working under pressure. "Sir," Rodriguez said, "if she's right about the chemical weapons, we don't have a choice. We have to trust her. And if she's wrong, or if this is an elaborate setup, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But if there's even a chance that thousands of people are going to die tomorrow, we can't walk away." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. Rodriguez knew the lieutenant was dealing with an impossible situation: incomplete intelligence, a wounded team member, and a mission that had expanded far beyond their original parameters. "Thompson," Morrison called out, "what's your honest assessment? Can you handle a combat operation?" Thompson looked up from where Doc Patterson was securing his bandages. "Give me enough painkillers, and I can shoot straight. Might not be able to run far, but I can cover your six." Doc Patterson considered for a moment. The new supplies made a huge difference. He's stable, and the bleeding is stopped. But he shouldn't be doing anything strenuous for at least 48 hours. "Which we don't have," Morrison said. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Samira, you're going to tell us everything you know about the mosque facility, layout, security, guard routines, everything. If your intelligence is accurate, we'll attempt to secure the chemical weapons." Samira nodded and moved to a flat area of the cave floor. Using small rocks, she began constructing a detailed model of the mosque and surrounding area. "The main building is here," she said, placing a larger rock. "It's a traditional design with a central prayer hall and a minaret, but the real facility is underneath. There's a basement that was excavated about 2 years ago, supposedly for storage." "How do you know about the excavation?" Chen asked. "Because I was here when they did it. I was running a mobile medical clinic in this area, treating villagers who couldn't get to the regional hospital. I watched trucks coming and going for weeks, bringing in equipment and taking out soil." Rodriguez studied the makeshift model. "What made you suspicious?" "The amount of electrical equipment they brought in. Generators, ventilation systems, refrigeration units. Far more than you'd need for simple storage. And the soil they removed was contaminated. I tested samples and found traces of chemicals that shouldn't exist in natural soil." "So you've been planning this for 2 years?" Morrison asked. "Not planning," Samira corrected. "Investigating. It wasn't until 6 months ago, when Aliyah told me about Al-Rashid's network, that I understood what they were really doing." Rodriguez was impressed by the depth of Samira's preparation. Whether she was a doctor or an intelligence operative, she'd been conducting a sophisticated surveillance operation for an extended period. "The entrance to the basement facility is here," Samira continued, placing another rock. "It's disguised as a storage room, but there's a hidden door behind a false wall. The main laboratory is 1 level down, with storage areas for the chemical weapons." "Guards?" Morrison asked. 3 men, as I said. 1 at the main entrance to the mosque, 1 patrolling the perimeter, and 1 inside the facility itself. They rotate every 4 hours, and the next shift change is at midnight. Rodriguez checked his watch again. They had less than 3 hours to plan, and execute an assault on a chemical weapons facility. Even for Navy SEALs, it was a tight timeline. What about chemical protection? Doc Patterson asked. If we're going into a facility with sarin gas, we need proper equipment. Samira reached into another hidden cache and produced several military-grade gas masks. I've been preparing for this possibility for months. Rodriguez examined one of the masks. It was sophisticated equipment, the kind used by chemical weapon specialists. Once again, he was struck by the level of resources Samira had access to. Where did you get military chemical protection gear? He asked. From the same people who provided the medical supplies, Samira replied. There are elements within the Afghan National Army who have been tracking al-Rashid's activities. They can't act officially because of political considerations, but they've been supporting my investigation. Morrison studied the gas masks carefully. These are American manufacture. Recent production runs. The implication was clear. Samira wasn't just getting help from Afghan military sources. Someone in the U.S. government, or at least someone with access to American military equipment, was supporting her operation. How high up does this go? Morrison asked. High enough, Samira replied. But not high enough to prevent bureaucracy from slowing down the official response. That's why I've been working alone. Rodriguez was beginning to understand why their mission briefing had been so incomplete. If there were unofficial intelligence operations running parallel to their own mission, it would explain why certain information hadn't been shared through normal channels. All right, Morrison said, making his decision. We're going to do this, but we do it my way, following my rules. Samira, you'll guide us to the facility and provide intelligence, but you stay outside during the actual assault. I'm coming with you, Samira said firmly. Negative. You're injured, and we can't have civilians in a combat zone. I'm not a civilian, Samira replied quietly. Not anymore. Rodriguez looked at her more carefully. There was something in her tone, something that suggested she'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. What do you mean? Morrison asked. Samira was quiet for a long moment, and Rodriguez could see her wrestling with some internal decision. Finally, she spoke. 6 months ago, when Aliyah died in my field hospital, she wasn't the only patient I lost that day. Al-Rashid's network had attacked a vaccination clinic in Kandahar. Poison gas, delivered through the ventilation system. 43 people died, including 12 children under the age of 5. Her voice was steady, but Rodriguez could hear the pain beneath the surface. I treated the survivors, she continued. Chemical burns, respiratory damage, neurological effects. Some of them are still dying slowly from the exposure. And I realized that being a doctor, treating the victims after the fact, wasn't enough. I had to stop the people causing these casualties. So what did you do? Rodriguez asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. I started hunting them, Samira said simply, using my medical access to investigate attacks, documenting their methods, tracking their network. And when I found members of their organization, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Rodriguez understood what she was telling them. Dr. Samira Hassan had become something more than a humanitarian doctor. She'd become an assassin. How many? Morrison asked bluntly. 7, Samira replied. 7 members of Al-Rashid's network who will never hurt anyone again. The cave fell silent except for the distant sound of wind through the rock formations. Rodriguez tried to process what he just learned. The woman they'd rescued, the woman who had saved Thompson's life, had also killed 7 people in what amounted to a personal war against a terrorist network. Jesus Shane Mutirid. Those 7 men, Samira continued. They were planning to attack refugee camps. Chemical weapons deployed against people who had already lost everything. I couldn't let that happen. Rodriguez found himself looking at Samira with new understanding. She wasn't just someone seeking justice. She was someone who had taken justice in her own hands repeatedly. The medical skills, the tactical knowledge, the sophisticated equipment, it all made sense now. That's why you know so much about their security procedures, Morrison said. Yes. And that's why I can't stay outside while you assault the facility. I know their personnel, their routines, their weaknesses. You need me with you. Rodriguez could see Morrison processing this new information. Having Samira along would be a tactical advantage, but it would also mean bringing someone into combat who was already wounded and whose mental state was questionable at best. What guarantee do we have that you won't compromise the mission? Morrison asked, because Samira said, if we fail tonight, those children who survived the Kandahar attack will die along with thousands of others tomorrow. I won't let that happen. Rodriguez believed her. Whatever else Samira might be, doctor, assassin, intelligence operative, she was someone who would do anything to protect innocent people. That kind of motivation could be either an asset or a liability in a combat situation. We'll evaluate your condition when we reach the mosque, Morrison decided. If you can't keep up or if you compromise our approach, you stay behind. Non negociable. Samira nodded acceptance of the terms. As they prepared to leave the cave system, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the complexity of the situation they'd stumbled into. What had started as a routine special operations mission had evolved into something much larger. A race against time to prevent a massive terrorist attack, guided by a woman who embodied the moral ambiguity of modern warfare. Rodriguez, Samira said quietly as they prepared to move out. There's something else you need to know. What? Al-Rashid isn't just planning to attack the mosque in Kabul. The chemical weapons here are a test. If the attack succeeds, he has cells in 7 other cities ready to carry out similar operations. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. 7 cities. Potentially tens of thousands of casualties. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I needed to be sure you would commit to stopping him here. If he succeeds in Kabul, it won't matter how many other cities we warn. He'll have proven that his methods work, and other terrorist groups will copy them. Rodriguez realized they weren't just trying to prevent one attack. They were trying to prevent a new model of terrorism from spreading across the region. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. As they moved out of the cave system toward the mosque on the hill, Rodriguez carried with him the weight of everything Samira had told them. Behind them lay a village full of hostiles who were serving as an unwitting distraction. Ahead of them lay a chemical weapons facility guarded by 3 men who probably had no idea that the fate of thousands of people might depend on the next few hours. And beside him moved a woman who had transformed herself from a healer into a killer, driven by a mission that had consumed her life for the past 6 months. Whatever happened in the mosque facility, Rodriguez knew that none of them would emerge unchanged. The moonlight filtered through the Afghan mountains as they began their approach to what might be the most important mission any of them had ever undertaken. In the distance, the silhouette of the mosque stood dark against the star-filled sky, holding secrets that could determine the future of countless innocent lives. Rodriguez checked his weapon one more time and settled into the rhythm of movement that had become second nature over his 8 years as a SEAL. But tonight felt different from every other mission he'd completed. Tonight, they weren't just fighting for tactical objectives or strategic goals. They were fighting for the fundamental principle that innocent people should be able to live their lives without fear of indiscriminate chemical attacks. As they moved through the darkness toward the mosque, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that everything that had brought them to this point, the failed mission, the mysterious woman, the revelation about chemical weapons, had been leading inevitably to this moment. Whether they succeeded or failed would depend on their ability to trust someone whose true identity remained a mystery, and whose motivations went far deeper than anything they'd been trained to handle. But as Rodriguez looked at his teammates, wounded but determined, and at Samira, moving with quiet purpose despite her injuries, he knew they would give everything they had to stop what was coming. Because sometimes that's all anyone could do, stand between innocent people and those who would do them harm, regardless of the personal cost. The mosque grew larger as they approached, and Rodriguez began to make out details of the building that would either become their greatest victory or their final battlefield. Either way, by dawn, the world would be a different place than it was tonight. The mosque stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, like an ancient guardian watching over the valley below. As Rodriguez and his team approached through the rocky terrain, He could see that Samira had been accurate about the building's condition. From the outside, it appeared to be just another abandoned religious site, victim to decades of warfare that had swept through Afghanistan like recurring storms. But Rodriguez is trained. I picked up details that suggested otherwise. The building's structural integrity was too good for something that had been truly abandoned. The walls showed signs of recent maintenance, and, more tellingly, there were worn paths in the dirt around the building that indicated regular foot traffic. Guard positions. Morrison whispered into his comm, using hand signals to direct the team's attention. Rodriguez spotted the first guard exactly where Samira had predicted, a figure moving slowly around the perimeter of the building, weapon slung casually across his shoulder. The man's body language suggested boredom rather than alertness, which supported Samira's assessment that they didn't expect trouble. Second guard at the main entrance, Chun reported through the comm system. Rodriguez could just make out a figure sitting in the shadows beside the mosque's main door. Again, the posture was relaxed, suggesting these men were going through the motions of security rather than expecting an actual threat. Third guard is inside the facility, Samira whispered. He won't be visible from out here. Morrison studied the building through his night vision scope. I count 2 external guards, but their positioning is sloppy. They're not covering each other's fields of fire effectively. Rodriguez wasn't surprised. If Samira was right about these men being left behind as a distraction while Al-Rashid moved the main operation to Kabul, they might not be the most experienced members of his organization. What's the approach? Thompson asked. Despite his wound, he had insisted on taking a position where he could provide covering fire if needed. Morrison considered their options. The terrain around the mosque provided good concealment, rocky outcroppings, and scattered boulders that would allow them to get close without being detected. But once they made their move, they would need to neutralize both external guards simultaneously to prevent either one from raising an alarm. Chun, you take the perimeter guard, Morrison decided. Rodriguez, you with me on the entrance guard. We move on my signal. What about me? Samira asked. Morrison looked at her critically. In the hours since they'd left the cave system, she'd shown no signs of slowing down despite her injuries. If anything, she seemed to be moving with increasing purpose as they got closer to their objective. You'll guide us to the facility entrance once we're inside, Morrison said. But you stay behind cover until we've secured the area. Rodriguez could see Samira wanted to argue, but she simply nodded. Whatever her true background, she understood the importance of following orders during a tactical operation. They began their approach, using the natural cover to move within striking distance of the guards. Rodriguez found himself paired with Morrison, moving along a route that would bring them up behind the man stationed at the main entrance. As they got closer, Rodriguez could see that the guard was indeed relaxed, occasionally checking his phone and smoking cigarettes. Through his earpiece, Rodriguez could hear Chin moving into position on the perimeter guard. The coordination required for a simultaneous takedown was something they'd practiced hundreds of times, but it never became routine. Too much could go wrong if the timing was even slightly off. In position, Chin whispered. Copy, Morrison replied. On my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. Rodriguez moved with Morrison in perfect synchronization. They emerged from cover silently, approaching the entrance guard from his blind spot. The man never knew what hit him. Rodriguez's arm closed around his throat, while Morrison secured his weapon. Within seconds, the guard was unconscious and restrained. Clear, came Chin's voice over the comm. Rodriguez felt a moment of satisfaction at the smooth execution, but he knew the real challenge lay ahead. Getting past the external security was the easy part. The guard inside the facility would be more alert, and they still had no clear picture of the basement layout. Doors locked, Morrison observed, examining the mosque's main entrance. There's another way, Samira said, appearing beside them despite Morrison's instructions for her to stay in cover. She led them around to the side of the building, where a smaller door was partially concealed behind a decorative screen. Service in trance, she explained. The lock was broken months ago and never repaired. Rodriguez tested the door and found it opened easily. Beyond it lay a narrow corridor that led into the main prayer hall of the mosque. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, with elaborate tile work and calligraphy covering the walls. But what struck Rodriguez most was the smell. Beneath the expected odors of old stone and dust was something else, something chemical and artificial. "You smell that?" Doc Patterson whispered. "Cleaning compounds," Samira said. "They've been trying to eliminate chemical residues from their experiments. But you can't completely remove the traces." Rodriguez found the smell unsettling. If they could detect chemical odors at the ground level, whatever was happening in the basement facility was significant in scale. "Where's the entrance to the basement?" Morrison asked. Samira led them across the prayer hall to what appeared to be a storage closet. But when she manipulated a hidden mechanism behind some boxes, a section of the back wall swung inward, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "Jesus, shame mutirid. How did you figure out the mechanism?" "I watched them use it," Samira replied simply. "During my surveillance." Rodriguez wondered again about the extent of Samira's preparation. She'd clearly spent a significant amount of time observing this facility, learning its secrets. The level of dedication required for that kind of surveillance suggested this was far more than a personal vendetta. They descended the staircase carefully, Rodriguez leading with his weapon ready. The stairs were well constructed, with modern materials that contrasted sharply with the ancient mosque above. Someone had invested serious money in this facility. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a hallway that looked more like part of the medical laboratory than a basement. The walls were lined with white tiles, and fluorescent lighting cast everything in a harsh, clinical glow. The chemical smell was much stronger here, and Rodriguez could hear the hum of ventilation equipment. "Third guard is in the main laboratory," Samira whispered. "Last door on the right." Morrison signaled for the team to spread out and advance tactically. Rodriguez could feel his heart rate increasing as they moved down the hallway. Unlike the external guards, whoever was down here would be inside a confined space with potential access to chemical weapons. If things went wrong, they could all be exposed to lethal substances. As they approached the laboratory door, Rodriguez could hear sounds from inside. Equipment running, occasional footsteps, and what sounded like someone working at a computer. The guard wasn't just standing watch. He was actively involved in some kind of work. Morrison positioned the team on either side of the door, then signaled Rodriguez to test the handle. It was unlocked. Morrison counted down silently. Then they breached the room with professional precision. The laboratory was larger and more sophisticated than Rodriguez had expected. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, and several workstations were set up with chemical analysis instruments. At the center of the room, a man in a lab coat looked up in shock from where he'd been working at a computer terminal. But what made Rodriguez's blood run cold wasn't the man's surprised expression. It was what he could see behind him. Rows of metal containers marked with international chemical weapon symbols, and beyond that, an assembly area where what looked like delivery devices were being prepared. "Nobody move," Morrison commanded, his weapon trained on the man in the lab coat. The man raised his hand slowly, but Rodriguez could see his eyes calculating, looking for options. This wasn't just a guard. This was someone with technical knowledge, someone important to the operation. "You speak English?" Morrison asked. "Yes," the man replied, his accent suggesting he was well educated. "You are American soldiers." "That's right. And you're going to tell us everything about what's happening here." The man smiled, which Rodriguez found deeply unsettling. "You're too late. The primary shipment left for Kabul this morning. What you see here is just the backup supply." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. If the main chemical weapons had already been moved, their mission might be pointless. But Morrison pressed on. "How much is here?" "Enough," the man replied. "Enough to demonstrate that your security measures are meaningless. Enough to show that we can strike anywhere, anytime." Rodriguez could see Morrison processing this information. Even if they'd missed the main shipment, the chemicals in this facility were still a significant threat. "Samira," Morrison called out. We need you to assess what we're looking at here. Samira entered the laboratory, and Rodriguez saw her expression change as she took in the scope of the facility. She moved to one of the chemical storage areas and examined the containers carefully. "This is worse than I expected," she said quietly. "They're not just storing chemical weapons, they're manufacturing them. And they're experimenting with binary agents." "What's that mean?" Chen asked. "It means they've found a way to make the weapons more stable for transport and deployment," Samira explained. "Two relatively harmless chemicals that become lethal when mixed. It makes detection much harder." Rodriguez understood the implications immediately. If terrorists had access to binary chemical weapons, traditional security measures would be largely ineffective. The individual components could be transported separately and assembled at the target location. How long would it take to manufacture enough for a major attack? Morrison asked the prisoner. The man in the lab coat remained silent, but Samira answered. "Based on what I'm seeing here, they could produce enough agent for hundreds of casualties in about 6 hours." Rodriguez felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Even if they secured this facility, there could be other laboratories, other production sites. They weren't just trying to prevent one attack. They were trying to shut down an entire chemical weapons program. "We need to get this intelligence back to command," Morrison said. "This is way beyond our mission parameters." "There's no time," Samira said urgently. "If the main shipment is already in Kabul, the attack could happen within hours. We need to find out exactly where it's going and warn the authorities." She turned to the prisoner. "We're in Kabul. Which mosque?" The man smiled again. "You think I would tell you? I'm already dead whether I speak or not. But if I remain silent, hundreds of your allies will join me." Rodriguez could see the frustration in Samira's expression. They had the evidence of the chemical weapons program, but without specific intelligence about the target, they couldn't prevent the attack. "Check his computer," Doc Patterson suggested. "There might be communications about the operation." Samira moved to the terminal where the man had been working. The screen showed what appeared to be a chemical analysis program, but she began navigating through the system, looking for other files. "It's all encrypted," she said after a few minutes. "Professional-level security. It would take hours to crack." Rodriguez was thinking about their limited options when he noticed something odd about the prisoner's behavior. The man was watching Samira work at the computer with intense interest, as if he was concerned about something specific. "What's he worried about?" Rodriguez asked Morrison quietly. Morrison had noticed the same thing. "What's on that computer that you don't want us to see?" he asked the prisoner. "Nothing," the man replied, but Rodriguez could hear the nervousness in his voice. Samira had found something. "There are video files here," she said. "Recent recordings." She opened one of the files, and Rodriguez felt sick as he watched what appeared to be a test of chemical weapons on laboratory animals. But, more importantly, the video showed the assembly process for the binary weapons system. "They've been documenting their entire program," Samira said. "This is evidence of everything. The chemical synthesis, the delivery mechanisms, the testing procedures." Rodriguez realized they'd found something potentially more valuable than preventing a single attack. This was documentation of an entire chemical weapons program that could be used to track down other facilities and prevent future attacks. "Keep looking," Morrison ordered. "There has to be operational information about the Kabul attack." Samira continued searching through the files while Rodriguez and the others maintained security. The laboratory felt like a tomb, sterile, silent except for the hum of equipment, and filled with the tools of mass destruction. "Here," Samira said suddenly. "Communication logs." She opened a file that showed a series of text messages in Arabic. Rodriguez couldn't read them, but Samira's expression as she translated was grim. "The attack is scheduled for tomorrow morning during first prayers," she said. "But it's not at the Grand Mosque. It's at 3 smaller mosques simultaneously, all in residential areas with high population density." Rodriguez felt his blood turn to ice. A coordinated attack on multiple soft targets would be much harder to prevent and could result in massive casualties among civilians. "Which mosques?" Morrison asked. Samira read the locations, and Rodriguez could see her mental map of Kabul forming as she processed the information. They're all in different districts, she said. It would take hours to coordinate a response to all three locations, even if we could get word to the authorities immediately. How are they planning to deploy the weapons? Chen asked. Samira scrolled through more files. Ventilation systems. They've been conducting surveillance of the buildings for months, mapping the air handling systems. The binary agents will be introduced separately into the air supply, mixing as they circulate. Rodriguez realized the sophistication of the plan. By targeting the ventilation systems, the attackers could ensure maximum dispersion of the chemical agents while minimizing their own exposure. It was a professional-level operation that went far beyond typical terrorist capabilities. We need to get this intelligence to coalition forces immediately, Morrison said. Even if we could reach them instantly, there's not enough time to secure 3 separate locations, Samira replied. The morning prayers start at dawn. That's less than 6 hours from now. Rodriguez looked around the laboratory, taking in the evidence of the extensive chemical weapons program. They'd succeeded in finding proof of the terrorist network's capabilities, but they were running out of time to prevent the actual attack. What if we could eliminate the source? He asked. If we destroy the chemical weapons that are already in Kabul, they can't carry out the attack. The shipment could be anywhere in the city, Morrison pointed out. We don't have the resources to conduct a city-wide search. Samira was studying the communication logs more carefully. Actually, she said, I think we might. Look at this. She pointed to a series of messages that showed delivery confirmations and location references. Rodriguez couldn't read the Arabic text, but Samira's translation was encouraging. The chemical weapons are being stored at a safe house in the Wazir Akbar Khan district. The messages reference specific landmarks that I recognize. Rodriguez felt a spark of hope. If they could locate and neutralize the chemicals before they were deployed, they could prevent all 3 attacks simultaneously. How far is this district from here? Morrison asked. About 2 hours by vehicle, Samira replied. But that's assuming we can get transport and navigate the checkpoints between here and Kabul. Rodriguez realized they were facing another impossible timeline. Even if everything went perfectly, they would be cutting it extremely close. There's something else, Samira said, continuing to read through the files. These messages reference other cells in other cities. This isn't just about Kabul. It's part of a much larger coordinated attack. Rodriguez felt the scope of the situation expanding beyond anything they could handle. Multiple cities, multiple cells, multiple chemical weapons attacks. It was a nightmare scenario that would require massive resources to prevent. How many cities? Morrison asked grimly. 7, Samira replied, confirming what she'd told him earlier. All scheduled for the same morning, all targeting religious sites during morning prayers. The weight of responsibility was staggering. They'd stumbled onto intelligence about a coordinated terrorist attack that could kill thousands of people across an entire region. But there were 6 Navy SEALs, one of them wounded with limited resources and communication capabilities. We can't stop all of it, Morrison said finally. But we can stop what's happening in Kabul, and we can get this intelligence to people who can deal with the rest. Rodriguez nodded. It wasn't the complete solution any of them wanted, but it was the best they could do with the resources available. First, we secure this facility, Morrison decided. We can't let them continue production, and we need to preserve the evidence. What about him? Chun asked, indicating the prisoner. Morrison studied the man, who had been listening to their conversation with growing alarm. It was clear that he understood the implications of the intelligence they'd discovered. He comes with us, Morrison decided. He might have information we need. As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Rodriguez took one last look around the facility. The sophisticated equipment, the carefully organized chemical storage, the professional documentation, all of it spoke to a level of preparation and resources that went far beyond what he'd expected from a terrorist organization. But more than that, It represented something that challenged his understanding of the conflict they'd been fighting. This wasn't just about ideology or politics. It was about people who had access to weapons of mass destruction and the willingness to use them against innocent civilians. As they led their prisoner up the stairs and back into the ancient mosque above, Rodriguez carried with him the knowledge that the next few hours would determine whether thousands of people lived or died. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also clarifying. Whatever else happened, he knew that he and his team would give everything they had to prevent the attacks. Because sometimes that's all anyone could do, stand between innocent people and those who would do them harm, regardless of the odds or the personal cost. The moonlight streaming through the mosque's windows seemed brighter as they emerged from the chemical nightmare below, and Rodriguez took it as a sign that there was still hope, however slim, of preventing the catastrophe that was planned for dawn. The drive to Kabul was the longest 2 hours of Rodriguez's life. They had commandeered a vehicle from the mosque facility, a battered Toyota pickup that looked like 1,000 others on Afghan roads, but had been modified with reinforced suspension and a more powerful engine. Clearly, al-Rashid's organization didn't stint on operational security. Samira sat in the passenger seat, constantly checking her phone for updates from her contacts in the city. The prisoner, whose name they'd learned was Dr. Yassin al-Mahmoud, was secured in the truck bed under Thompson's watchful guard. Despite his wound, Thompson had insisted on taking the responsibility, arguing that his reduced mobility made him better suited for stationary guard duty. Rodriguez drove, while Morrison coordinated with their command structure through encrypted communications. The challenge was conveying the scope of the threat without triggering a bureaucratic response that would take too long to be effective. Command wants verification of the intelligence before they'll authorize emergency response protocols, Morrison reported after ending another frustrating call. "We don't have time for verification," Samira said. "Dawn prayers start in 4 hours. If we wait for your bureaucracy to catch up, people will die." Rodriguez understood Morrison's position. The military didn't mobilize massive resources based on unverified intelligence from questionable sources. But he also understood Samira's frustration. They were racing against